Hey Daniel, my name is Tina, and I'd love to be considered for the creative ops lead role. I've went ahead and actually reviewed this application, and first things first, I want to say Signal because you asked for that at the top of the application, just probably to verify that I read it. But I also wanted to take it a step further and walk through just kind of a working plan that I think what we can do together when it comes to executing the tasks of this creative ops lead role. So I took a look at this and I kind of just create a plan. So let's kind of go ahead and look at the plan. So when I saw this plan, I kind of noticed that we have lots of context, and I like to think of context of as pieces of information that we all have access to, right? So we have our ideas, we have our insights, we have our client wins, founder notes, communications, comments, things like that. And oftentimes, like a lot of the great content comes from that context, right? But the challenge is having kind of like a system where all that context actually lives. And so the first thing that I would recommend building, just when we look at this flow here, is actually putting all this context in a database, right? Could we create automations and the pipes to take our raw ideas, if it's in a voice as an example, put it into that database? If it is like your emails or the notes or a client one, wherever that data lives, can we put it in one central database so that we can access it? But more importantly, we can build agents that can access that information so that we can create really like high performing content from that point on. And so the first step is to get all this context into a context database is the first piece. And I recommend Airtable for this. Now, the next piece that I would love to build for you is a story finder agent, because in my opinion, the best content pieces comes from stories. And the stories really unfold and come from context, right? And so we can create a story finder agent that reviews and looks at this context database to identify what are the stories that we should go after, right? Once when it identifies the stories, I think it comes down to formats in terms of what formats should this story be transitioned to, right? Should the story agent determine, is this a short form agent? Is this a written, purely written? Like, could this be articles? Is it good for a visual? Things like that, right? And this is where the story finder's agent job is to both identify the stories that come from this context, but to also create the briefs to determine what formats are going to go well for the stories that it finds, and then ultimately send it to a distribution agent where we can actually, publish it across many different platforms, optimize per platform. All right, so let's kind of go ahead and also talk a little bit about what these briefs actually look like when it comes to creating it. So within the short form briefs, there's many different formats that you can go after. There's the traditional hook and overlay kind of agent or format that you can go after, where you have a B-roll video in the background and then a hook on top. That can be something that we can leverage it because it's something that I see perform really well across social media and it's relatively easy to build. Then we have a B-roll agent where if you wanted to consolidate a bunch of videos, B-roll videos together and then put a voiceover on top, we can actually build an automation or agent to build that execution. And then finally, we can actually have a talking head video agent where there's motion graphics on top. There is, B-roll laid over on top of that. You can either have a filming script, which could be you, or you could also have an avatar. Just something to consider if you want to free up your capacity. But this is something that in terms of like what is available within short form, this could be a few examples, of course, with any other examples that you see yourself. The one thing that I think is really important is that all of this should be grounded in trend data. And what do I mean by this? What I mean is essentially we want to make sure that any of the content that you are creating actually performs in many different platforms, right? And so the way that we do that is we can actually pull in trending data across platforms like Eden, Virlo AI. These are platforms that are really connectors to identify what is actually, performing best across social media, because we want the content to be grounded not only in your voice, but in trends data to make sure that it actually performs really well. Now, touching a little bit on what the written brief could look like, when we think about written, this is an opportunity where we can actually take some of those stories that we find and turn them into written content pieces, right? So whether it's a long form article, and we actually use the Eat framework within Google just to make sure that the content itself is optimized for search, but we can also leverage AI to create standalone posts that are grounded in your voice as well as in trends data as well, and also create the captions for all the social posts as well. And so ultimately, again, like we want to make sure that this is still grounded in trends data to make sure that we are pulling on data that actually shows that content is performing in a different area and then apply it to your content as well. And so this is an example of some of the content systems that we could build together. I'm a Zapier Solutions partner. I do this for a living, so I've built all the agents that you can possibly imagine. I'm really deep into the tech as well as picking up any new platform as well. And I just love building this stuff. So I hope to be considered and thank you for your time. Have a good day. Bye.